Redmond's that he donated, you know,
Right.
as well to a park diesel.
Okay.
Have some photos of that brought up when it was working up on the sale.
Yeah, I do representation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, I was thinking, you know, if you put in a display next once you open down
Yeah.
there, you know, people.
Morning, Stuart.
Good morning, Bill.
I don't. Oh. Right. Just trying to get the IT working. The IT, yes. Yes.
It's been there, done that.
Never quite straightforward. Rescuing. I need to work with John with various other folks.
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, Bill. Hi there.
The seat there, the front.
Oh, yes, well, I'm going to find a seat with the back.
Yes.
I'm going to effectively back.
Chair on one of these thrones. Fine, the day will be a few.
John is doing his IT. But I know that. Yeah. So the only bit that queries. Can I interrupt? Sorry. Yeah, go on. You're really welcome to the museum. Or do you want me to do it? Happy to you. Quite fine. I'll do that. But you with the family, you know, hello, good evening, welcome. Fire and there's fire, just follow your member staff out downstairs. You know, I'm not out. You anticipate that. And can we leave belongings here in this room? When you know, I'm just thinking when people are wandering around up until 5 o'clock. It's not going to be locked, so yes, but we can leave them here, but it's not locked. Let me just double check that with the members. But you're with where I'm coming from. Just looking at that, in other words, where the loos are, those are just there. In other words, things that people need to know. Fire, loos. Yes. Yeah, and the lunch is presumably served in the room below where the coffee. I think so. Yeah, I think so. John on that. Yes. What else have I got? And for Leeds was and as far as we're aware, I've never changed the new. Sorry, this is my proof sheet. Oh, yeah, yeah. Right. You are, I mean, describing you as a museum professional curator of industrial history. Just a curator of industrial history. Well, museum professional. Well, if you want. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. Okay. Right. Anyway, yeah, that was basically it. No problem. I'll leave you to make sure that everything's working for you. Yeah, it seems to be just the things do some strange things. Tell me about it. Yes. And how are they doing concerts? Well, no, I'm not. I'm irritated. These songs are doing this. I'm trying to do it. And these days, I'll get to turn it off. Good morning. How is John? It seems to be running reasonably well. I'm more than happy to introduce and all this as we agree. I've got a crib sheet.
I'm just going to speak with,
Michael's downstairs.
Michael. I mean, I spoke to him in the SLS last Saturday. But
So, yeah, so basically Michael's downstairs, the Phoenix hasn't arrived.
right, fine.
So I'm not sure whether Phoenix is through with his wife and others. I don't know how many the other others are.
No, I mean, no problem. Everything seems to me to be okay. Just to double check from you, I'm going to introduce various things, my usual thing there. Next meetings, industrial, I'm going to announce.
Yeah, do that. It's like,
Colour experience,
Yeah.
colour experience. Daphne then is mining in the UK, and then Newcomen is still, that's 23rd, yeah. It's still the same.
no, that one's changed. That's Jonathan Ailing now on.
Ah, right.
That's Jonathan is, let me just have a quick look at the latest. Jonathan is now doing, well, can you witness a signature for me? Of course. Well, I find you that, I'll give you a pen.
Yes, right.
It's just a deed of variation.
Oh, no, absolutely no, I don't need to know what it is. As long
It's
as
just to avoid me, it's just to avoid me getting done for even more death duty for that one day.
Right. Witness
Second
the
page. Yeah.
Witness the signature, no problem.
So can I, if I could just kind of check which login I'm using for the Zoom meeting, was it?
It's the one with, I think the second one. It's the, no, it's the next one down. Hang on, it's the one, the 878, one ending 87. The 878. I'll set Zoom going and give you got 14 people online already. 10 days. John McGee, promote to panelist. Thank you for that.
Right, I've signed out, there,
Yeah.
the date there, my home address. I've called myself an accountant, I'm not retired. Yeah, I've more time.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
No problem. So who is then the?
Join as panelist.
You should be the same as yesterday. Yeah, John. So that you can. So you're a panelist now. I'll give you permission to share now. Hang on 2 seconds. That's it. So you should be able to share now. Spot on. That's the revised list.
Right.
Jonathan, then Duncan. It was Duncan, then Jonathan.
Yeah, no problem. I'm only going one.
Yeah.
Because that's, otherwise.
Oh yeah, it just confuses everybody.
Share each talk separately or?
No, just 2 seconds. It should be able to share okay now. Yeah.
Share each talk separately as.
Yeah. So we'll share yours. Share Michael's. And what we do is we close that one down and then share yours.
Yeah.
You can do it very quickly. Oh yeah, it's coming out. It's sharing now. Okay. That's sharing.
Your when change on tonight.
Yeah, that all looks okay. Yeah, that's what's going out, John. So that's the picture that's going out.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'll just and I'll log in a few minutes and just check the second slide.
John,
Bill tried.
I've met him some distant pals, yes, but I mean,
Bill's gonna very kindly.
I've said I would introduce everything. He's normally going to. So, it'll be, the other thing which I should have mentioned as speaker, he says you're a speaker, presumably it was chat at the end. Because when it's on the methodology now, it's 60 folk, I think it's got all at the end, isn't it?
Do you mean questions?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll leave some space for questions.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
But online.
Online, I think,
I'd have to go via John at the end.
It's John here, because, John sort of had this monitoring.
Yes, John, that's fine.
Yeah.
I think I'm better to.
I would ask them, because I'm not.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry, yeah.
No, I'm thinking that I just can't be asking the question.
You can't, no, because then, yeah.
But again, to everybody in the thing, questions at the end.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you just.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, with people on the Zoom call, I would have thought, just so it's. Yes, because Bill's asking about people on the call, can they chat?
No, chat.
Yeah, chat.
Put the questions on chat as they think of them, but we'll take them all at the end.
Right, that's fine. The next thing is, at what time do I think you go down there? I'm looking at how number of people are very slow on the stairs.
Well, I would start to say, can we start moving upstairs when you drink up and move upstairs?
Right, now.
Yes. Give them another 5 minutes, give them another few minutes, but make sure everybody's got a drink.
Right.
Yes. If
Oh,
you,
But you mean that, if I do that, it means that everybody wants to me to buy you. Have you got a drink? No.
John, is that the only toilet down here? I'm just thinking if Bill's going to direct people to the toilet.
Yeah, there is another toilet and when Bell, yourself say again.
Yeah.
There's a toilet on the main floor.
The main floor further down.
Further in, next to the spinning wheel.
Right,
So-
yes. I'm just thinking that comes sort of halfway through the talk, might be some exodus if everybody's had a drink now.
Totally. No, that's good. Thing, actually. I can get a glass of water.
Yeah. Maybe want a couple out then, one for yourself later.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Okay, see that.
Do we need to more? I know, I suspect it's downstairs. I suspect they'll be putting it out downstairs while. I don't know for certain, but.
Well, it certainly won't be in this room.
It won't be in this room, and I don't think it's still down.
I noticed a room with lots of tables.
Yes. Yeah.
It's my first visit, it's been on my list for a long time, but
All right.
I've never managed to get it. Now I know how to get it.
Probably.
Yeah. Have you come far?
Oh,
Nothing else
different
to
week.
feel on.
Oh, right.
So it's, quite,
It's not that idea.
Yeah. You just never know what traffic's going to be. They've got to
it's a taxi to the railway station.
Oh, right, yes.
And then
They're different months.
instructions
They're all
were
stopping.
precise. It said catch your number 14 bus outside the railway station. There aren't any buses outside the railway station. There aren't any buses.
No, I speak that.
Oh, sorry, yes.
That's all, I'm just
Yeah, yeah.
popping out some of these.
Yes. Yeah, well, I asked, they had an information desk at the railway.
Oh, it's a
station.
station, a big
But of
phone
course, totally unintegrated. What would we go?
Don't like buses now.
And then somebody said, oh, I think Wellington.
Yeah.
And I remembered that's where they used to go, from in this direction.
They did, yes. All right. Yeah. Oh,
I found out just by chance.
down on Edison Road and walk around. Yeah, oh, just outside it, all right.
There's a clicker, yeah.
But it's quite a walk.
Yeah.
Well, when you're rapid like this,
Basically, yeah.
it's of no consequence.
That's what's on the.
When you think about the average age of people coming to this. Yes.
Not bothering with coffee, and I've got to get home again and come back.
Come back, yeah.
So I thought I'd stay.
I had one before I left.
We're also.
Then I'll be out.
That's it. That was the
You've got to think about
situation as well.
You've got to think about these things, don't you?
Yeah. Well, particularly with older people, a lot of us are on water tablets.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, I'll find them at, just mention that.
Yes, I was for quite a long time, but the doctor took me off and wasn't complaining. Brown, yes, yes. Things.
We've got
All it was, it's actually, it makes it up. It's quick, it's changing on that screen as well, so that's all. It's just started monitoring what's going out, so we can. It's an absolutely, it's a box. It does that because it just goes to sleep. Right.
There's hundreds of
What it is we've started to early night. Just gone to sleep. Yeah, so basically, just tell it. Yeah, just put it in the seats at the front.
like school, isn't it?
No.
Yeah, well, if you they'll jump in this little camera, but we'll do that little camera because if somebody's stood in this,
So we don't need the video now.
no, we don't.
Okay. Can do that through screen or
No, that'll be fine.
yes.
You should. You should.
Right.
Let's see. I'll just see if I can.
Want to speak? Do you want to speak something? Sorry? Do you want to speak to the General Assembly?
Just doing a very quick sound check at the moment to see if it's okay. Can you hear that all right?
That's it, yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, you might be gathering we're having slight problems with the sound at the moment. Normal service will be resumed as soon as possible.
That should be, and you should now be hearing sound okay. We're in business.
The mute button on the microphone is pressed.
Okay, everybody, just to those people online, we're just going to start in a couple of minutes. If there's any glitches in this, I think we'll restart. But basically, I'm going to hand over now to to Bill to chair.
Right. I'll wait for John to get built. So, welcome. I'm Bill Jagger. I'm my sins chairman of the Industrial History section, and also I'm a member of the Newcomen Society. So, just before we start, the usual housekeeping notes, parish notices. We're not expecting a fire alarm. If there is anything like that, out through the back here, following a member of staff. Hopefully you've all signed in and got your badge, because that was a requirement, obviously, for fire and all the rest of it. Loos are at the top of the stairs, the way you come through there. And whilst the room is not going to be locked, you can leave anything you want to have as you wander around or anything like that here. So first, most importantly, phones off or to silent, please. And remember, those that are zooming online, your images may go to the rest of the world. Make sure your background is reasonable. So, and it also helps the IT side if you can turn off your video. Thanks to John Suter for not only organising it, but doing the IT. I'm not quite sure which was most stressful, but thanks very much to John for sorting that out.
Ask me when we get to 4 o'clock tonight.
Fine. So a word from our sponsors, as the saying goes, is our president of the Yorkshire Archaeological and Historical Society.
And I will very brief, and I'm doing a bad example. I have got my badge, but it's on my seat. So there we are. I did sign in. Just to say welcome, I'm very glad to be here today. I'm grateful to my industrial history colleagues for arranging this splendid event, and for the Newcomen for joining in to make it a joint event. This, I have to say, all this to do with locomotives and the like is, from my personal perspective, rather late in the day. But that just means I'm looking forward to learning even more than I'm sure even the experts amongst the audience are going to do. I'm looking forward to a splendid day. Grateful to John McGoldrick and his colleagues here at Armley Mills for inviting us to come and do this. I think we're going to have a splendid day. Now, I think Professor Smith, I think you'd like to say a word from the Newcomen.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome on behalf of the Newcomen Society. For my great sins, I'm the president for another year, so you'll probably come across me if you're members, and if you're not members, then I hope you'll come across me because you will join after this event, which of course is a very good reflection on collaboration across Yorkshire. I don't know whether the South Yorkshire and North Yorkshire need passports to go into each other's areas.
You're all right if you're not from Lancashire.
Well, I'm a foreigner, so it's all right. And I think Swiss have also got the reputation in terms of looking after their pennies, or in our case, centimes. Anyway, I'm very glad that we have got such a nice big crowd here, and of course, a large number of people online, so wonderful. As our society is also, of course, looking for new members, we are more importantly looking for the next year for new council members, because I think 2 or 3 people are falling off the line at that point. So that's a potential interesting thing for you to do. The other thing which is also of urgency for us is we need to find somebody who is enthusiastic about websites, because our website is quite ancient. It's perfectly functional, but it does need a fresh touch and improvement. So if anybody is enthusiastic about websites, please come and see me, and I'd be very, very, very pleased to talk to you. If you're online, then get in touch electronically and we can talk about it. So I think that's all I've got to say. I think one of the reasons why there's so many people is it's because it's railways. And I think railway people are generally very enthusiastic about learning things about the past, and hopefully we'll also see a very good future for the railways in this country. Whether or not it's GBR or whatever it is, we'll look for the future. Anyway, and thank you very much, Michael, for joining us for this talk. Thank you.
Right. Just again, this meeting is obviously part of the normal meetings of both societies. So next meetings, Industrial History, Tuesday, the 3rd of February. We are visiting Bradford for what was the Colour Museum, and I think it's now called the Colour Experience. And if you want to, please book via Jane Ellis, so you'll see about. And then Saturday, the 28th of February, mining in the UK, 6,000 years of history of mining with gentleman Steve Denton, who was a retired Chief Inspector of Mines. And then for Newcomen, it is on the 23rd of February, Jonathan Aylan on running shadow factories. As far as I'm aware, all the arrangements for today are as advertised. 11:30, Michael Bailey, 12:30, John McGoldrick, 1:30 lunch, 2:30, and you can go into your various groups and the swaps over. And the museum shuts at 5 o'clock. There should be plenty of time for you to have a look around. So please, I'm welcoming Michael Bailey, Dr. Michael Bailey, who his reputation goes before him, I'm sure, in connection with telling the truth about early steam locomotives. But over to you then. Thank you very much indeed. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thanks very much indeed, Bill. And this morning I've got to cover a huge subject in a very short space of time. Oh, I'm right. So I'll start off in the right note. Yeah. Okay, fine. Very good. Now, I'm going to start off with a very provocative statement. There was no such thing as a locomotive industry in Leeds. Now, what the heck am I talking about? What there was, instead, was a large, active and innovative manufacturing industry in Leeds. On 6 of the manufacturing sites also made locomotives. That's a subtle point which is important to reinforce as I go through the subject this morning. Now, I can't claim to be an expert on Leeds locomotive manufacturers. I haven't done the research, but I am very pleased indeed to acknowledge those expert authors who have written splendid books telling that story. Paul Murray Thompson, Edwin Kitson Clark, Ron Redman, Don Townsley, Michael Lane, and Tom Rolt in particular. So I'd like to acknowledge all of the work that they have done, because I have borrowed all of the work that they have done to summarize the story of the Leeds locomotive industry. Now, the 6 sites of which I started by saying are nicely summarized here, or 5 of them are. You've got the Airedale Foundry, noted as A, the Steam Plough Works of Fowlers as B, the Boyne Engine Works of Manning Wardle, and the Hunslet Engine Works and the Railway Foundry. The point being that they are all closely clustered together in the Hunslet area to the south of the city of Leeds. Now, the one site that is missing there, that's only 5 of them, is of course the first one, which is the Round Foundry, which is a few blocks to the north in Holbeck. The site was founded in 1795 by Matthew Murray. Now, Murray had already by that stage earned an enormous reputation for the work that he was carried out, innovative work that he had carried out on behalf of his previous employers. And he had succeeded so well with his career that he got to the point where he said, or was encouraged to found his own factory, and he selected the site at the Round Foundry in Holbeck. Now, he did this with the joint. Oh, sorry, got past that. Let's go back. There we are. He did this with David Wood, went into partnership with him, and also from 1799, James Fenton, and the firm that traded from 1799 onwards as Fenton, Murray and Wood. The work that they were carrying out was really earned them a very high reputation and was very profitable indeed. From 1805, they started to make portable steam engines, and from 1806 to 1810, they made factory, pumping, dredging, mining, brewery, ballast, and marine engines. So that's a pretty good start to their business. In 1811, John Blenkinsop approached Matthew Murray to say, of course, with his patent that he had taken out for the use of his rack and pinion type of railway, which he proposed to use on the Middleton railway line, and could Murray design and build a locomotive that would operate on that railway. Now, this story is, of course, very well known. All I'm going to say is that 5 or 6 locomotives were made at the Round Foundry from 1812 and during the next few years, not only for the Middleton line, but also for the Kenton and Cook's Lodge line up on Tyneside. Now, in 1819, David Wood died, but James Fenton and Matthew Murray continued as Fenton and Murray. By 1825, of course, the Stephensons had made their locomotives well known, and the railway, of course, that demonstrated that only too well was the Stockton and Darlington Railway. But in 1825, Matthew Murray was in communication with the Stockton and Darlington Railway with regard to a locomotive that he might build at the Round Foundry. So he ditched the Blenkinsop system, but was still very concerned that the cast iron track used on the early railways would be too heavy for steam locos. So he designed this loco as an articulated vehicle to spread the load. And this was the sketch that has been handed down to us, that was offered to the Stockton and Darlington, but was declined. Now, in 1826, sadly, Matthew Murray died. But the firm continued as Fenton and Murray, thus acknowledging that Murray's name was important amongst the industrialists of the Northeast and elsewhere. But Murray's shares, the share of the business, passed to his son-in-law, Richard Jackson. And Jackson was an engineer who was very talented or learned well from his father-in-law, and so he became quite a prominent person at the foundry. Now, just moving on to the timeline, we're going to come into the 1830s at a time when the Liverpool and Manchester Railway had opened and the demand for locomotives rose really too fast for Robert Stephenson and Company to fulfill all of the orders that were expected of them. And so they subcontracted 2 locomotives from Newcastle. They subcontracted 2 to be made at the Round Foundry, and the Stephenson Company forwarded a set of drawings to enable the locomotive to be made. But what they did then do was to hang on to the drawings and then start to make their own locomotives and sell them in competition with the Stephenson Company. I'm not quite sure how well that went down, but anyway, they did, and they started to sell locomotives to the earliest railways both in this country, but also in France and in Germany. Now, I can just move on to this image here, which is not showing up too well. It's a document which has been lodged in the Technical Museum in Paris, which has been annotated and signed by Richard Jackson, and this is for one of the early French companies between Saint-Étienne and Lyon. So that document I have got a good print of, and I've got it on the desk over there. And anyone would like to see that early document, please let me know, and I'll show it to you. So, for after 1833, orders from the locomotives started to come in, and Jackson played a most important part in that company activity. But in addition, a chap called Samuel Exley joined the partnership, and indeed he concentrated not on locomotives but all the other business of the Round Foundry was carrying out, and he carried on that business under the name of Fenton, Murray and Company, whilst the locomotive business, which was run by Jackson, was known as Fenton, Murray and Jackson. So the two were running in parallel. Now, I've got a series of drawings of the output of the various locomotive factories. So the common feature is the colour scheme. The total number of locos made in the year are in blue. Those for overseas are in red, and those for the UK market are in green. So in the 1830s, the locomotive orders carried on with fairly modest, but nevertheless in 1840, as you can see, it suddenly shoots up. There was one order from the Great Western Railway for 23 locomotives, and this is well illustrated in this particular graph. 20 of the locos were of the Firefly type that were ordered by the Great Western Railway, and these were built at the Round Foundry, 20 of, and another 3 of the goods version of that. But then things all went wrong, because in the early 1840s, Fenton and Murray suddenly started to their business circumstances started to deteriorate, and they started making losses. There was an agreement between all the directors that said if Fenton, Murray and Company needed money to be able to tide them over until better trading circumstances, they could ask for the money from the sister company, Fenton, Murray and Jackson. Just at a time when Fenton, Murray and Jackson were making all these locomotives, and cash was at a very difficult stage. The end result, very quickly, is that Fenton, Murray and Company and Fenton, Murray and Jackson went bankrupt. Matthew Murray must have turned in his grave after all the work that he had done and all the success and all the innovation which he had introduced, and suddenly the whole thing closed and all the workmen lost their jobs. All very sad that the very first example of locomotive building in Leeds ended in such failure. So we'll move on now to the second of the sites, the railway foundry. The railway foundry is a very difficult site to understand. I'll try and do my best to lead you through it. Down in Hunslet, the railway foundry is located just there, just south of Pearson Street, and was the first site to be set up. On the opposite side, you'll see the Airedale foundry, but that's a subject that I'll return to when we get round to that topic. 1837, Charles Todd, who had been working for Fenton, Murray and Jackson, left their service because he wanted to start up on his own. He got in touch with James Kitson, who was an iron merchant, and agreed with him that they could set up their own locomotive business. But they needed capital. And they managed to find the capital from David Laird, who was the main investor in the company, and formed the company, which was Todd, Kitson and Laird. Now, Todd, Kitson and Laird, their famous example has survived all the way through to the present day. The Lion, which is on there on top left, with yours truly on the footplate at the Liverpool Road site in Manchester. But one of the things which I did photograph was the works plate of Todd, Kitson and Laird, which it still carries to this day. So what Charles Todd, that was 1839, straight away afterwards, Charles Todd fell out with James Kitson and with David Laird. I get the impression, after trying to sort of stand back from this, reading all the details, that Charles Todd was a very difficult man to get on with. He seemed to fall out only too readily with those who worked closely with him. It was that bad that James Kitson and David Laird walked out of the partnership so soon after the completion of the Lion and the Tiger, and set up on their own across the road in the Airedale foundry. I'm going to park the subject there and come back to the Airedale shortly. But let's carry on with the railway foundry. So Charles Todd was now stuck because he had no capital. And he managed to find somebody willing to bring that capital in. His name was John Shepherd. By 1843, of course, there were an awful lot of people who had been working for Fenton, Murray and Jackson, who were now unemployed, and they found new employment at the railway foundry, or many of them did. And one of those persons who was found new employment was the very talented David Joy, and he came across and Todd straight away recognised the strength of his capabilities. In 1844, Charles Todd left again. He'd fallen out with the partnership. He actually went to the Haythorne Davy Company, and they too got involved in building locos. About 20 odd locos were made there, but otherwise they carried on as general manufacturing company. Those coming in included Edward Brown Wilson, who was to play such a major part with the development of the railway foundry's site. In 1845, James Fenton, he's the son of the James Fenton of Fenton, Murray and Jackson. He's the son who had learned his trade, as it were, with the Murray Company. And also John Chester Craven joined. He too had previously been employed by Fenton, Murray and Jackson. This was the future of the railway foundry was helped enormously because of the enormous jump in demand for steam locomotives in the mid-1840s because of the railway mania. The demand for locos was so great that it was easy to pick up orders if you could demonstrate that your establishment was capable of making them. Now, in 1846, there was further trouble between the partners. I don't know what it is about Leeds, why everybody can't get on with each other, but anyway. Wilson, Edward Brown Wilson, came to the fore as the leader and the senior partner of the site. Craven left altogether, and Fenton, James Fenton, who was, say, a very talented engineer, he agreed to become the works manager for the site without being a partner. So from that moment on, it was E.B. Wilson and Company. Now, Wilson was an extraordinary person because he was very outgoing, very positive, and did an awful lot to try and get as many orders for the foundry as he possibly could. He spent a lot of money developing the site. He built new facilities for a erecting shop and other tool shop, machine shops, and so on. So much so that by 1847, the expansion was so great that the railway foundry was the biggest manufacturing establishment in the United Kingdom. Very impressive. So impressive, he wanted to impress all his customers. He had a banquet in 1848 that I still don't believe, but it is written that 2,000 guests turned up to this banquet in his new erecting shop. Can that really be true? 2,000? That's a lot of people. Anyway, he, of course, recognized only too readily that David Joy, that I mentioned earlier, David Joy was promoted to become the principal draftsman for the company. And one of the characteristics that Wilson demonstrated was you must have standardization. It costs too much to make every locomotive different. Standardization was the way to keep your costs down to a sensible and competitive figure. So not only was he making locomotives, he was also making carriages, wagons, stationary steam engines, and heavy engineering equipment. So it's not just locomotives. He was kept the railway foundry very busy indeed. Now, in 1852, the country introduced the new company legislation, which allowed companies to be formed as opposed to partnerships. So you start to see the beginning of the change from partnership management to private limited company management. And this was the case in 1852 with the railway foundry, because Wilson, with all his talents, had no overall concept of cash flow, of money. He was spending it like there was no tomorrow, because after the railway mania, the market dropped. And because he had such a huge establishment, he decided also to make locomotives for stock, for subsequent sale. That is a recipe, of course, for disaster. So he made a lot of locos for stock without sale, which meant that more and more of his working capital was tied up in machinery. He was also thought it would be a good idea to promote the notion of running railways by the provision of locomotives and running the locomotives on behalf of the railway companies. Sounds like a good idea, except that, once again, the capital that's tied up in the locomotives is not paid for straight away by the customer. It is eked out month by month. And cash started to look a bit bleak. And so his shareholders, which he now had to watch, and very importantly, his shareholders said, this has got to stop. Our money's going out the window. And so there was a terrible row, and the upshot is that Wilson walked out on the whole show. So the remaining shareholders said that we've got to have someone to be the manager of the railway foundry, and they recruited Alexander Campbell, who was a man who had been very successful as the manager of the site up in Greenock in Scotland. He was a Scot. He came down with his family to take over the running of the railway foundry. But it was too late. The damage had been done, cash ran out, and in 1858, E.B. Wilson and Company closed. They too went bankrupt. That's the second site which got off to a very bad start. One thing which I wanted to show you, of course, was about the, where are we? That was the numbers of locos which are made. You can see the enormous jump in orders as he started to make locos for stock and so on. It was a bit of a disaster, but in the 1859-60, it just fell away. The locos that he was successfully selling were the Jenny Lind type of loco, which David Joy had developed. They were sturdy engines which were very pleasing to the railway companies. Not only the 222 passenger engines, but also the other wheel arrangement variants. But the point again being they were standard engines. If you ever wanted to make any variation to one of their engines, or asked, if you were a railway company and you asked for a variation, you'd have to pay for it, typically £25 per alteration. So he had the right idea in some ways, but it just wasn't enough. So what happened? Well, the railway foundry site was put up for sale. All the assets were put up for sale, and there were auctions to dispel all of the huge collection that had been built up, including the site of the railway foundry, which was split up into three main sections and various other bits and pieces. But you can see the way the whole site was split up and acquired by other companies in due course, as I shall outline. That was in 1859. Now, I have brought with me, for anybody who would like to see it, a list of the machine tools and other equipment that were in the E.B. Wilson railway foundry at the time of the auction. I've got them all listed, and it makes fascinating reading to know what was required in a locomotive factory at that sort of time. The whole site, by the way, was 35,300 square yards, so it's much larger than most other sites at that time. Now, the railway foundry name carried on, so I propose to pursue the rest of the story with the railway foundry first, before returning to the other sites. In 1860, a chap called William Hudswell, who was a leading draftsman at the Airedale foundry, which again I've got to come back to, and John Clark, who had been an apprentice at R&W Hawthorne up in Newcastle, and they joined together, and also bringing someone in to have the capital necessary to acquire the site and set it up was William Clayton, who was the investor that brought the money in. So they purchased lot number 6 that we saw on the previous slide, the southwest corner of the former Wilson site. They weren't so ambitious. Now what's happened? There we are. There we are. Okay. They weren't so ambitious. As you can see there, the loco production between 1860 and 1900 was much more modest. In fact, they pretty well targeted on 15 locos per year as a norm. So that's how they would set the personnel that they employed to meet with that sort of demand, not in addition to all the other activities and manufacturers that they were involved with. They also made steam hammers, maritime and canal equipment, tugboat engines. So again, it was general manufacture in addition to the locomotives. From 1866, Joseph Rogers joined the company because he brought with him the patents that he had taken out for factory pulleys and drums. And so this was an additional line of work to add to the work of the railway foundry, and the company became Hudswell, Clark and Rogers. That lasted through until, we'll come on to that shortly, right. But the first loco that they made in 1861 is this one. It's a saddle tank, 060 saddle tank. And the loco business started, but you see there, the locos are still mainline or industrial, but large ones. They haven't yet got to the point of the smaller steam locos. They had to go at anything that they could get hold of, and in this case, there is a lot of railway equipment, including the locomotive, which is a broad gauge, 7-foot gauge engine, and the other rolling stock there, the other tenders and vehicles. This is for a pier on the Isle of Man, and this photograph comes from the Isle of Man. In 1871, they made their first narrow gauge engine, and they started to concentrate more on industrial locos than mainline locos. By 1874, they built a new erecting shop on the site, and they concentrated on standard small tank engines for industrial purposes. The Class A was an 040 outside cylinder class. Class B was 060 outside cylinder class, and Class C was 060 inside cylinder class. And there was a steady flow of work to the end of the century, and indeed well into the 20th century. In 1880, Rogers stood back, and Hudswell, Clark and Company was formed as not the new partnership now, but the new company. Again, moving more into to proceed into the later part of the 19th century, you start to see companies replacing partnerships. In 1899, to bring the story right up to the turn of the century, it became a private limited company, Hudswell, Clark and Company Limited. Right, so I've got to rush on now to the third of the site, and now we shall cross over Pearson Street to the Airedale Foundry. And this is a fascinating subject, because in 1839, just to take you back to where we left, James Kitson and David Laird, they went across the road to the Airedale Foundry, formed a new partnership, Laird, Kitson and Company, and successfully, this was done at a very positive time in the locomotive market, and they got off to a flying start. In 1842, Laird decided that he would retire, but nevertheless, he left a lot of his money in situ that allowed the Kitson Company to proceed. To replace him, Kitson was joined by Isaac Thompson, who was an iron merchant, and William Hewitson, who had been apprenticed at Robert Stephenson and Company in Newcastle. And the company was then called Kitson, Thompson and Hewitson. This was very successful. The demand was heavy because of the mania years, and so successful was the Airedale Foundry that in 1854 they actually acquired their own ironworks to provide them with the iron that they used regularly on the Airedale Foundry itself. In 1858, Thompson retired as well, and the company was known as Kitson and Hewitson. In 1863, Hewitson died, and then James Kitson decided to form his own company with two of his three sons, hence Kitson and Company. And that was the beginning of the long history of the Kitson and Company. They were the largest of the Leeds manufacturers. They made girders, bridges, cranes, textile machinery, armaments, agricultural implements, marine engineering, steam ploughs, turbines, brewing equipment, blowing engines, and steam hammers. All that in addition to locomotives. Oh, and I forgot the machine tools as well, of course. So, what sort of locomotives were they making? Well, look at this graph, which shows everything they made from 1840 to 1900. The target production that they went for was 1 loco per week on average. That's the sort of market that they had to contend with, and all locomotive manufacturers had to contend with. It's a sawtooth of a graph. There was no continuity of orders. All the manufacturers had to struggle with this upturn, downturn of a market year in, year out. They never knew, one year to the next, how many locomotives they were going to be able to compete for. I'd hate to be a production engineer of one of these companies at that time. It must have been a nightmare. So that is the reason for this up and down, up and down, up and down. And of course, the market changes. Well, not just in this country. We have recessions in this country. We have upturns in this country. But then you add recessions and upturns all around the world for the overseas market. So there was just no way of knowing what the market was going to play out to. Now, one wonderful source for the engines of the Kitson Company is 2 volumes, beautifully bound in leather, with all of the locos drawn out and dimensioned. And these 2 volumes are in the archive of the Stephenson Locomotive Society. They're prized possessions because they are so beautifully illustrated. Let me just show you the first one. This is the 2 pages at the very beginning of the volume. A nice, neat drawing with the basic little dimensions and all of the basic dimensions on the right-hand page. And that most, I can't say all, but most of the locos that the Kitson Company made all the way through the 19th century are shown in these volumes. As soon as the photographs were available, they started to replace the drawings with photographs. And from the early 1850s, 1860 here, they've started to include these splendid photographs, which are available to see, of course, in the SLS collection. So this is a typical loco for the home market, a 222 for the Great Northern Railway. You notice all these are all mainline, or predominantly mainline locos. For overseas, I've just picked these out as random examples for the overseas market. This one for Brazil, an 060 for the Bahia and San Francisco Railway in Brazil. And the next one, I couldn't resist showing you this, because every year my wife and I, we travel to Australia to see our son and daughter-in-law, and I made a point of seeing a different part of Australia, excuse me, each time we go. And on this occasion, I went to Newcastle, New South Wales, and there in the Technical Museum stands this fantastic locomotive. It's built by Kitson in 1870, and it worked non-stop until 1967. And it's hardly been touched. The tank's been a little extended a little, but otherwise it's virtually as it was made. At least I'm sure parts were replaced, but in design it was pretty well as made. It worked on the Richmond Vale Railway, which connected several coal mining areas together. So it never actually worked on a main line, but nevertheless did sterling work preparing trains to travel on the main lines of New South Wales. So that was a particular beeline I made to go and see that, and I was thrilled to have that opportunity. Other locos they made certainly were for industrial customers, such as this one for the Barrow Steel Company. Quite a heavy-duty locomotive, that one. But more importantly, in 1876, they began to diversify and make steam trams. Now, the steam trams were a particular market for them, and they did very well with them. And they made no less than 260 of them between 1876 and 1893. Innovation also followed them, as we can see here, with the introduction of the articulated Kitson-Mayer locomotives from the 1890s now, made for gauges from 2'6" gauge to 5'6" gauge, of different wheel arrangements, 0440, 0660, 2664, 2880. These were workhorses working on some of the world's most remote mining areas. But of course, the important market for them also was India. An awful lot of locos were made for the Indian market. This one for the Great Indian Peninsula Railway. And of course, I couldn't come without putting on my tie today, which is a loco built by Kitsons and used in India. That's actually the Fairy Queen, which is in the museum in Delhi. So I thought that was the appropriate tie to put on. So this is the Airedale Foundry. It's actually just in 1920, a bit beyond the turn of the century. A very busy, very profitable site in its sort of golf club shape site in Hunslet. And lastly, I'll put in this aerial view. That's what it looked like, supposedly from the air, that was published in the early part of the 20th century. Right, now I've got to rush on to the, what are we doing for time? Okay, right, now on to the fourth site, which is the little Boyne Engine Works, another part of the site that had formerly been the E.B. Wilson site. In 1858, John Manning and Charles Wardle formed a partnership together with and employed Alexander Campbell. Now, we last saw Alexander Campbell as being the works manager of E.B. Wilson and Company. So as they went failed, he of course was looking for a job, and therefore he was only too pleased to be employed by Manning and Wardle. He played a very important part in the beginning of the company, because on their behalf he attended the auction of the E.B. Wilson assets. And the thing that he insisted that they bought were the drawings and patents. Having acquired those, you then got a flying start to your new venture. So they managed for not a great deal of money, managed to acquire all the drawings, and this explains why the earliest locos of E.B. Wilson and Company look very much like the last locos of E.B. Wilson and Company. Let's have a look at their graph through the course of the year, from the start up all the way through. Their target market seemed to be around 3 locos per month, which is a fairly high throughput, but of course they went for the smaller loco, the smaller industrial engine, which allowed you to produce more in the course of a year than the other companies. There was a growing UK market for these small tank engines, and by 1900, by the end of the century, they had made no less than 1,500 locos. This is what they look like typically. This is, I think, the first one that they made, and it looks very much like a product of the old Wilson factory. and they produce a number of drawings and specifications and catalogues and so on to stimulate orders from industrial sites all the way around the country. So, a second success, wonderful. Now, move on to the fifth site, the Hunslet Engine Works. Now, this was established in 1864 by a chap called John Towlerson Leather. He had been an associate of the Stevenson family. He was actually a civil engineer, a very successful civil engineer. And the reason for setting the company up was not that he would run it. In fact, he bought it so that his son could become the principal partner. His son was Arthur, and he established Arthur as the manager of the site. It was a terrible failure. Arthur was just not cut out for managing an industrial site such as the Hunslet Engine Works. And so he was replaced by James Campbell. Now, James Campbell was the son, the eldest son, of Alexander Campbell, who you will remember was just across the road working for Manning Wardle. That made an interesting situation. You've got the son, you're the father and the son competing with each other just across the road. I'd love to have been there at some of the family dinner parties, wondering what they were talking about. He had been, James Campbell had been apprenticed at the E.B. Wilson site before the failure. So he knew what he was doing, and he was a very talented lad. He did very well, and the company did very well. Just to illustrate how well they did, that's the small beginnings of the site, just off Jack Lane. Just a small series of shops, enough to get going to start the production at that time. But in 1898, you can see how the whole site had grown enormously to fulfill the requirements of a growing order book, and it was indeed a successful company. So this young lad turned out to be just what was needed by Leather. They made also small tank engines. This is one of the first locos that they made in 1865, but they had nevertheless 100 employees by the end of 1865, because of course there was a pool of talented craftsmen which had been made redundant when the Wilson firm closed, and therefore there were men looking for work, men who could offer the skills that these partners require. They made their first loco for export in 1866, and the first narrow gauge loco they made was in 1870. So have a look at their graph. You can see here the numbers of locos that they made through the year, typically up to one loco per fortnight. So it's interesting to make comparison with the different outputs of all these different factories. Now, in 1872, James Campbell became the sole proprietor of the Hunslet company. He really was a very talented individual. He was aided by his brother George, but it was still nevertheless the Hunslet Engine Works. It wasn't reflected in their names. Now, it's important to understand what sort of activities they were carrying out. And I'm going to take a few seconds to read through what they undertook on that site at Hunslet. And I'm quoting now: to carry on all or any of the business of electrical and light, heat, motive power, water supply, and sanitary and general engineers, manufacturers of and dealers in motor carriages, traction engines, locomotives, railway carriages, tramway cars, cycles, bicycles, tricycles, velocipedes, and any other kinds of carriages, engines, and vehicles, whether drawn, propelled, or worked by electricity, steam, gas, oil, animals, human beings, or otherwise. Well, what else? What else is there? And plant and machinery of all kinds, and also miners, smelters, colliery proprietors, coal and coke merchants, fitters, metal founders, workers, converters and merchants, metallurgists, boilermakers, millwrights, smiths, carpenters and joiners, woodworkers, builders, painters, enamelers, annealers, gas makers, printers, box and packing case makers, proprietors of vans, wagons and other vehicles, carriers and warehousemen. What's left? We'll make anything. So their ingenuity knew no bounds. These locos, of course, are infamous as being the locos used on the Ballybunion line using the French Lartigue monorail system. Those were made, so that's an example of their ingenuity. In 1882, they made their first tender locos. Now, talking about tender locomotives rather than tank locos, I actually saw a tender-fitted Hunslet loco in Australia in the Thirlmere Museum, just to the south of Sydney in New South Wales. So that is, I was quite surprised to see it. I think it's the only tender Hunslet-built engine I think I've ever seen. By the time we got to the late 1880s, then you started to move into the locos, quite a big order for locos for the manufacture for making the Manchester Ship Canal. And the Ship Canal order was all too important. In 1890, George Campbell died and James Campbell carried on his own for another 15 years. So when we talk about the Hunslet Engine Company, he's the man that one must remember. Just a further thought, I've got here an advert for the late 19th century showing one of the Ship Canal locos in its display there. The company carried on, obviously, into the new century and became a private limited company in 1902. And now we come to the sixth site, the steam plough works. The story starts with John Fowler. John Fowler was a Quaker and the son-in-law of Joseph Pease. Now, Joseph Pease, of course, from the Stockton and Darlington Railway, he was the general manager of the Stockton and Darlington. And so John Fowler was familiar with lots of engineering matters, but he took a particular interest in agricultural equipment, the development of agricultural machinery, particularly the ploughing engines. So he got to the point where he was receiving orders and then subcontracting the vehicles to the Kitson Company, and he was subcontracting the ploughing equipment to Robert Stevenson and Company in Newcastle. So it got to the point by 1860 where he said, I've got to start off on my own and make my own equipment. And so he acquired a site in Hunslet, just to the north of the Kitson site, which was 727 square yards, which is really quite moderate. In 1861, he was aided by William Hewitson, who we heard about in relation to the Airedale foundry. Because Hewitson had been liaising with him with regard to the manufacture of the vehicles for the steam tractors. But then in 1863, Hewitson died. So if that wasn't bad enough, in 1864, John Fowler himself had the most terrible accident, riding accident. The horse fell on him and pretty well crushed him. I think he lasted for a few days, but sadly he died
shortly afterwards. And so the driving force for this new factory, which had only been there for 4 years, suddenly there was a vacuum. So Robert Fowler, his son, took over, and together with Robert Edison and David Gregg, became the principal pursuers of the receiving orders and manufacturing in 1868. David Gregg was an innovative mind. Even though he was the general manager, he came out with all sorts of new innovative ideas. He took out umpteen patents. In 1865, they decided that they would diversify into making locomotives. And to enable them to do that, they hired Frederick Parker, who had been the works manager of the Doncaster Locomotive Works for the Great Northern Railway. So he knew what he was doing when it came to locomotive manufacture. So very shortly after that, in 1866, mainline locomotive production began. And in 1874, that was followed by industrial locomotive production, and that began. So by 1877, the site had grown enormously to 38,000 square yards, much larger in a very short space of time. There's the Airedale foundry at the lower part of the picture, and above it is the site of the steam plough works. The important thing to identify is that there was a separate building for the locomotive works on the other side of the lane. By 1900, they were employing 1,350 employees. That was a big industrial site. So let's have a look at the orders for locomotives. They were very busy indeed. Well, typically one loco per month on average. And say these were mainline locos, so they were big ones. But in addition, from the 1870s, a whole series of tank engines, particularly for overseas. You can see the red line there is much higher than the green line, so they were targeting on overseas orders and did very well. This is one of the locos for overseas. This one is the 240 for the Imperial Mexican Railways. Another example of the tank engines, industrial tank engines, is this 040 saddle tank for the Chile Nitrate Railways, which was built in 1876. But as they developed, they started to make more and more of a market in small industrial engines, including and especially locos for the sugarcane fields. This was a rapidly growing market for sugar, and obviously the sugar has to grow in a very hot and humid climate. And so places like Fiji, Queensland in Australia, particularly Queensland, and in other parts of the Philippines and Indonesia and other places that the cane fields started to develop. And the gauge was just 2-foot gauge. That was robust enough for umpteen thousand tons of sugarcane to be taken from the cane fields through to the cane mills. But also, of course, it was light enough to be able to take up the track and relay it as the sugarcane fields were expanded. Now, again, coming back to my trips to Australia, on one occasion my wife and I travelled up to Port Douglas, which is right in the north of Queensland, north of Cairns, to the sugar fields there. And then on the plinth is a locomotive, the Fowaballa, which was built by John Fowler and Company. So it's great to see that all those miles away. The centre of the industry in Queensland is a place called Bundaberg. And Bundaberg was not only the centre of the sugar industry, but it too developed its own capability for manufacturing. And so Fowler's did a deal with them and made available
the drawings for making engines, and so I was actually able to travel behind a Bundaberg-built Fowler engine in Port Douglas, a day I'll never forget. And that was the steam plough works as it was at the end of the century. That's been a very high-speed summary of the steam loco industry. I haven't covered it all. I couldn't. Otherwise, I'd be here all the afternoon. And so I hope that has been served well to pass over the history of the steam locomotive industry in Leeds. Thank you very much.
Any queries? Be quick, the timing was immaculate.
Nice.
Any queries from the floor?
Michael, could you say something about how they went about exporting from Leeds? Did they use overseas agents or purchasing people in the Commonwealth or what?
Right. Quick answer is read my book. There's one copy here for anybody interested in. It's a spare copy that I've got, which you can have a discount. No, what I made the point in that book that London was the epicenter of the overseas market, because overseas government agencies, the consulting engineers were based in London on behalf of the overseas companies, and the consulting engineers could also look at the examples being made for export and were able to say whether they were up to standard, which was an important part of the export market. And so they were well looked after, but it was through London that was the predominant means of export orders.
Thank you very much. Any more?
I'm sorry. Michael, these factories obviously used an awful lot of iron. Did any of them operate their own blast furnaces? Do you know? Or if so, was Leeds a producer of iron?
Well, I mean, the West Yorkshire has been a great iron producer for so many years. The Kitson factory, of course, they bought their own iron works so that they could be supplied with their own iron, sort of thing. That was an interesting point that the others didn't pursue. But the manufacturers concentrate on manufacturing rather than making iron, and relied on iron being brought into the site.
Just a very quick comment. If you look at those curves, they're exactly the same as in the 20th century and in the 21st century.
Yes, exactly so. Exactly so. Absolutely. I say, being a production engineer must be a nightmare. You never know what the market's going to do for you.
That's it. Thank you very much indeed. And perhaps can we thank Mike in the usual manner again. We've now got John McGoldrick, who's going to speak to us, curator of this esteemed museum, and he's been here for, I gather, something like 11 years. Is that right?
Just about.
Just about. And obviously he's going to talk to us about